Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video. This is Wind Waker Unflooded, a 3D modeling fan art project where I am reimagining the kingdom of Hyrule as it could have existed within the world and art style of the Legend of Zelda, the Wind Waker. Welcome all. This has been a joy to have you here. That's all I have to say. That's my introduction. We're working on Moblin Town. Here's the thing. Where do monsters come from? Because here's the thing. We see monster bases constructed throughout the Legend of Zelda series, and the understanding that I have is that often these are new encampments that Hyrule is being invaded by monsters. But where do they come from? When they slink back into the shadows from whence they came, into the darkness, where do they go? Where do the monsters come from? And my understanding, and feel free to comment if you have your own ideas, and maybe there are multiple sources of monsters. Of course, Ganondorf as the Demon King is a summoner of monsters. He is able to control them as his army. He's able to send them out from his fortresses and bases of operations. But where do they come from even before being summoned by Ganon? Where do they live in Hyrule? Are they wild? Are they wild inhabitants just living, just where they can throughout Hyrule? And just like I think it's a complicated answer depending on the game that we choose to dissect. But I'll say for the purposes of my project, for the purpose of this 3D modeling project for Wind Waker Unflooded, reimagining Hyrule as it would have existed before the Great Flood, right? I think that monsters, were I think living in the world and had their own base of operations, perchance their own town inside a cave deep below the earth. And this is the Moblin Town that I will be creating today. And this is just kind of, this is just kind of my idea, right? And I think that when Ganondorf summoned them, of course, he would have summoned them to his base of operations, and they would have made camps throughout the world as well. But I think it would have all started here. And that really excites me. And, some of the inspirations, of course, for this kind of underground monster city, I wanted to kind of reference the feeling of what we saw in the Zelda cartoon from the underworld, right? Because, of course, like, the underworld is an important element throughout the Legend of Zelda series and the games in different ways. What the underworld is can mean different things. Sometimes that means a different dimension. Sometimes that just means underground. Sometimes it means another time. It can mean different things. Sometimes it means the dark world. The world underworld, right? The word underworld can just mean other things. But as it originally existed, especially in Zelda 1, right, it hinted at these underground caverns, these labyrinths constructed by Ganon, inhabited by his monsters, right? And in the Zelda cartoon, this was reimagined into Ganon's central lair, right? The underworld where it was his base of operations, and he had his throne, and in front of it was the evil jar, right? Whenever Link, quote-unquote, kills a monster, it doesn't die, but it is teleported to the evil jar where it respawns, right? So that's just part of the lore of the show. I don't know, man. Like, I love that old Zelda show, right? And I know that it's maybe controversial in the fan community for several reasons, just because it is so different from what modern Zelda looks and feels like, right? Aesthetically, in tone, the writing is just, they didn't have much to go off of, so they had to make up their own idea of who Link and Zelda were, who Ganon was, what the world of Hyrule could be like, right? There's pronunciation differences. There's so many differences between what we find in the Zelda cartoon from the 80s and what modern Zelda is like. But I think they were doing great with what they had, give or take, and I would love to, like, just pay a proper homage to it. And so I think here in this Moblin Town, I think we can have a reference to Ganon's lair as was presented in that cartoon. That's what I want to kind of hint at, right? This idea that maybe Ganon, years ago had this lair that was a base of operations, and now it's crumbling kind of in the ruins of it. Monsters have continued to settle, because they are not welcome in the world above, right? In this world inhabited by humans, they're they would have been pushed out of it, right? Especially by a Hyrule that may be more protective of its borders. I imagine that Hyrule in the wake of the Great Flood, or leading up to the Great Flood, I think would have been a lot more protective. And I think that's definitely a story idea that I want to get into through this map, right? Because I talk about, like, what is the storytelling of this map? And I just want to clarify this real quick, right? Is that, like, this is a map-making project. So there's a story inherent through the environmental storytelling, right? That just through the presentation of this map saying, oh, this is what Hyrule could have looked like before the Great Flood. Through the modeling of this map, I can tell a story, right? But I also do want to make, like, cutscene style short films after this map is done. And that is definitely one of my ambitions as well. I just want to clarify that to anyone new to this project. Like, why am I approaching it this way? And I just think that that's worth clarifying. And I know I talked about it in my last video, and I just want to respond to this because I had a lot of comments that were kind of responding to my response. And we have a conversation on this channel. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes I repeat myself, but it's because we're having a conversation. I say something, you respond, I respond to your response, and we're caught in this endless loop of responses to each other. But it's because we're in a community here, and that's the beautiful thing about it. We respond to each other. But yeah, I guess it's just like, I want to clarify, of course, as always, is like, I'm not making a game here. I'm not a game designer. This isn't a ROM hack. It's not a fan game. That's not, when I talk about storytelling, it's not like, oh, this could be a dungeon to explore. That's not my mindset. I'm making a map. This is a map making project. It's a 3D modeling project. And so the end result is a 3D model. And of course, some animated cutscene style short films, which I'm very excited to get into. But I just want to clarify all that just in case, as always. I feel like I need to maybe have a disclaimer in my introductions now. Just because I do think it's worth clarifying, because I don't want y'all's expectations. I don't want to accidentally misrepresent what the project is. And I don't want to accidentally let y'all down. And so I apologize, just as always, for any miscommunication. Or if I accidentally misrepresented what the project is. But anyway, without further ado, Moblin Town. Let's talk about the evil jar itself, because that's something I wanted to approach for this build, and just thinking about the evil jar as an idea. Because yeah, I mean, like, lore wise, like, does it make sense? Is that consistent with what we're presented with in the games? I think like, I don't have to get into, like, did the evil jar work? Is it a true part of Hyrule's monster? Like how they respawn and where they come from. I don't have to necessarily speak to the truth of it, but I can have this relic underground that we see in the evil jar. It doesn't have to work, but it is something that can still exist in the world as a relic, maybe as part of an ancient myth, right? So I think that that's still worth it, right? Because I think that there's a lot about that in the Zelda series, right? Different games have different interpretations of things, and things that are maybe taken for granted as maybe true in one game are just myths in another, right? Due to the passage of time, due to the changing ideas from the writing team, which I think is fine, right? I think Zelda has gone on for long enough that, like, writers can have different ideas, and I want the series to be new every time. I welcome that, in fact. But that is just part of the series, right? Is that its own mythology changes over time. Hylia and her role has changed drastically over time, of course. Same with the Golden Goddesses, and they haven't been mentioned in a second. So it's like there's an ebb and flow of how different writers in the Zelda series treat its mythology, and I think that's really interesting. But I guess I just bring that up to say, it's just like, the evil jar as an element, right? It's something that doesn't have to even have actually been used in this world, but the jar itself can still exist, right? And that's just part of the great oxymoron, perchance, of the Zelda and its world building and its geography, and that's a whole nother thing. But I mean, that's just part of it, right? Is Zelda is a series that contradicts itself, and right, that's just how it goes. And where do you choose to, what contradictions do you choose to acknowledge, and where do you find, is there a greater truth in between the contradictions, and how do you read into that? It's a challenge. It's always a challenge, and it's one of the great challenges of this project, trying to make a map of Hyrule within the world of the Wind Waker, within its geography from the islands, extrapolating from that. But then it's like trying to fit in, like, okay, well, it's Hyrule. Let's use landmarks from other games because they would be there in this world. Let's pull from that. But then what do you do when you find disparity between the way that the geographies could line up, where you're like, well, this is the mountainscape as is necessary by the islands and their structure, and yet that's different, right? There's no Hyrule like it with as many mountains, maybe except for Breath of the Wild, which is where I think seeing that game and its map encouraged me to do this project, because it's a world full of mountains. In Ocarina of Time, sometimes it feels like it's, you look around and there's a couple of hills, but then it's just Death Mountain, and it's so isolated. There's no other mountain like it. And I appreciate Breath of the Wild for the way it made its map, because Hyrule is full of mountains, but Death Mountain is still this ultimate super volcano, right? It's a looming presence, right? And I think that they handle that really well. And just allowing Hyrule to be, I don't want it to just be like a plain, just like this, all these plains, fields, and it's just like simple fields, and then there's just one mountain, right? That's not what I want from it. I want it to be this diverse world. It's an entire kingdom, right? And that really excites me. That's something that excites me about this project, is just there's so many nook and crannies you can find and create, and I definitely want to keep leaning into that. I don't want to overdo it, but I do want to just make sure that this world is as rich as I can make it, right? And there may be limits to my ability, but I'll do my best, right? And I guess that's the thing. Have no fear. I'm doing my best. And there are things I run into with the limits of my ability, right? I'm only so experienced as a 3D modeler. I only have my own interpretations to go off of it. And I do have a team, and I run a lot by the team, and I run a lot by y'all, and y'all's comments make a huge difference in this world. But there are things where it's just like, yeah, like this is my perspective on what Hyrule would look like before the Great Flood. And this project is both empowered and limited by that. And I don't see it as a huge limitation, but it is just something that I keep in mind sometimes, is that like, well, this isn't what Nintendo would have made. That's a different idea. That's a different project. And I know that there's some commenters that I want to address this too, that there are commenters that, and I'm not arguing that with this. I understand this frustration, that you're like, well, this interests me because I want to see what Nintendo would have made if it was 2003 and they fully realized the Wind Waker and pulling elements from Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, games that hadn't been out, hadn't been released yet. That doesn't make sense for what they want out of the project, which I think is totally fair. Just to me, that's a different thing. And I acknowledge that this fan project is being made in, the year of our Lord 2024, right? And in the 2020s, just we have the benefit of the hindsight of all of these other versions of Hyrule that have come out with their own landmarks. And I don't want to ignore that, because if I do, the only 3D game that I could pull from would be Ocarina of Time. And its map is just not big enough, right? Like, I have to pull from more and create more myself. And that's the thing, too, is just like, fundamentally, this map is big enough that I'm going to have to be creative and come up with my own landmarks, which really excites me. And that's something that we're getting out of this video, right? It's like, well, let's create kind of our own place here, right? This Moblin town that, we've never really seen a place like it, right? And we've seen like a couple of other like kind of like enemy camps and monster caves, right? And I think about like Link's Awakening has like the boss Moblin, right, in his cave. But I think this, this is just another, like, it's going to be a unique location. And I'm just excited to get into more and more of those. So feel free to, comment down below your ideas for possible unique locations in the world of the Wind Waker Unflooded. Your comments make a huge difference, and I love reading them and seeing your suggestions, and they definitely influence like the what is on my list of what to work on next. I've gotten comments about adding a swamp to the map. That is definitely on my list. I know that there's people that want some of the I got a comment about like, well, don't ignore the ocean. Wind Waker has such a stylistic ocean, and Hyrule also has an ocean. Maybe give that ocean some of the Wind Waker's personality as well. I totally agree with that. Someone said, hey, I'm not seeing enough forests on the map. Really, maybe lean into that more. These are all comments that I read and definitely impact the, like I said, it's just like what I have on my list of what to work on next. Coastline villages, that's another comment. All kinds of things that, just all of that directly affects what I work on next. So feel free to comment down below that really makes a huge difference. But without further ado, I think I've rambled on perchance enough for this video. So without further ado, I'll let you go.
Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.